following program is a production of the American Educational Television Network.
The thought of that happening to you in your daily work creates stress.
You know, Kittredge, this conversation's getting old. I had it with you last week. You're starting to look like hell. You run around with your sleeves rolled up, your shoes unshined. This morning at an inspection, your gun was filthy. The guys on the watch are complaining about you being a flake, not pulling your own. Why don't you act like a real cop and shape up?
And the thought of it chewing out like that is a major cause of stress in your work.
319, I can take it.
319, 211 in progress, Bank of America, Lincoln and Harbor, your code 3.
Responding to a felony is another stress situation. Hello, I'm Chuck Connors, Reserve Deputy, L.A. County Sheriff's Department.
When young men and women enter a law enforcement academy, they are close to the prime of their lives, intellectually, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. They are a cut above the norm in most respects. Yet, compared to other professionals, in a short span of years, they typically have more physical and emotional problems and die at an earlier age. The problem is the inordinate amount of stress placed on the officers in the field and the men who administrate their duties. If they can learn how to handle these stressful situations, they can prolong their lives and their effectiveness in law enforcement. If not, the result will be a period of debilitation ending in serious illness. In California, Connecticut, and several other states, if an officer has been on the job for 5 years and has a heart attack on or off duty for any reason, it is presumed to be because of his work. People in law enforcement are among the highest potential victims of coronary heart disease in the country, and 85% of all heart attacks is related to stress. There are other reported studies that show very high rates of divorce, suicide, and other physical manifestations of an officer's inability to handle excessive tension. Some studies show that suicide in law enforcement is 6 times higher than the national average. Another statistic that goes against the national trend is that officers tend to retire relatively early, from age 45 to 55, and the average length of life for a metropolitan officer after retirement is 5 years. In fact, a study at the National Institute of Mental Health found that the life expectancy of the average officer is 59 years, a full 15 years less than the 74 years afforded to other professionals in the country. So here we have a group of individuals who begin their careers with a lot more going for them than their professional counterparts. But they retire earlier and die sooner than all the rest. We don't want that to happen. As a participant in this program, you will learn what stress is, the causes of stress in police work, the effects of stress on you and those around you, how to control stress in your life and minimize its undesirable effects. To participate, you will need your stress television workbook and a pen or pencil. Prior to this program, you should have reviewed the key terms on page 5 of your workbook and taken the pre-test on page 6. During this program, you will be given some ways to take inventory of yourself in order to see how you stand in terms of the degree of stress in your life and how you handle it. The pre-test is the first personal inventory you will take during the stress program. If you have not done so, take the next 2 minutes and complete it at this time. Answer each question with the 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 as indicated on the page. When you are finished, add up all the numbers for your total score. We will discuss the meaning of your score during the second half of the program.
Mighty PD, mighty PD, in the bush, like a snake, in the sky, like a hawk, in the sea.
Now, here to tell you how to handle and understand stress is John Stratton, the psychologist who works with police. John is not going to talk down to you from an ivory tower. He still works the street just like you do, which enables him to understand stress and the problems of policing, as well as its rewards. John's going to talk straight to you, telling you what he honestly believes. I know you'll find his presentations on stress interesting, but more importantly, beneficial to you.
The tendency in the police world is to think that psychologists don't have their act together and that they only deal with crazy people rather than normal, healthy people experiencing problems from time to time. If you remember, we talked about the fact that police officers enter above the norm. They enter above the norm emotionally and psychologically. And so you may question the person sitting next to you, but basically people who are psychologists who work with police are dealing with very healthy, normal people. In the police world, many see seeing a psychologist or a counselor as a sign of weakness, and it shouldn't be that way. This may be developed because of fear and misunderstanding of emotional problems. For example, if we consider physical pain for a minute, and you have a bad pain in your stomach, and you're bent over and you're hurting real bad, and if I was like this, you'd think I was crazy if I didn't go to a doctor to check out my stomach and go to a doctor who knows about stomachs. Well, the same thing happens with emotions. But what happens if you have emotional pain that bends you over? Oh man, I can't handle that, I'll have to push it aside. Well, too often what happens, because we don't understand emotion, because we don't understand our reactions, and we see it as a sign of weakness, we can let those problems or those emotional difficulties build and build like in a pressure cooker, and then the pressure cooker can explode. Too often what people tend to do, not just police, but everybody, is to wait for a long time before we seek assistance in the emotional area. What I would like people to do is to pay more attention, and when they have physical pain, to go to a doctor earlier. And if you have emotional pain, to seek assistance, whether it be from a psychologist, a counselor, or even a peer, to get a sense of how you're doing. In discussing a subject like stress, most people like to have a definition, so we've provided that for you on page 7. In addition, emphasized on page 7 is the fact that not all stress is bad. In fact, we need a certain amount of stress to get us going each day. And the chart on page 7 talks about where maximum performance is, with the right amount of stress, not too little or too much. In my discussion, rather than repeat what's in the booklet, I would like to say stress, define stress or use stress in these terms. Looking at stress as demands or pressures that are placed on a system. The system operates within laws, and if you push those laws too far, tension and frustration builds. What we're talking about is when demands or pressures are placed on a system. That system operates within laws, you push those laws too far, tension and frustration builds. That may not make a lot of sense to you right now, but let me give you an example. Supposing we take 4 wooden rulers and we put them out at the end of a table, and we put a certain amount of demand or pressure on those rulers. Eventually, they're all basically the same. One may break a little sooner, but if we continue to push, the rulers operate within certain laws, and if you push them too far, tension and frustration builds, and they become inoperable or they break. Unfortunately, we do not have a fuse that blows to stop us, or a circuit breaker that shuts down, or we don't have a recorded message that says, hey John, you're going too fast, hang up and try again tomorrow. If anything, in law enforcement we have the reverse. You're the last line of defense. You have to handle everything. You got to handle it, don't worry about it. There's not too much pressure for you. We do not put too many demands on you. It's just a difficult job, just get out there and do it. Well, you see, you as a human being are a system. You have physical limits, you have body temperature, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, triglyceride levels, a whole bunch of physical indicators of how our system is functioning. We can also look at it in terms of emotionally and socially and so on. So what happens is we have to look at what our limits are, and because we are human beings and we are individual, our limits may be different for one another. Now, what's important is that you realize that you can't handle everything, that sometimes you can be pushed beyond your limits. What they may be for any individual may be different, as I stated earlier. But let's give you one example. When I first started counseling police officers, after I was in the job for about 6 months, an officer came to see me, and he was basically checking me out. He wanted to see if I knew much or if I had it together because of the stereotypes some cops have towards psychologists. We talked for about an hour, and then he says, you seem to have your head screwed on pretty straight. What would I have to do to make an appointment to see you? And we set up a time to meet. Now, what had happened to this officer is he was involved in a shooting, and in that shooting, a partner he had for 3 years was killed, another officer he worked with for 3 months was shot and killed, and this officer shot and killed a suspect. Now, when he, in his law enforcement functions, he performed very effectively. And when he got back to the station, people are saying, hey, you did a good job, at least you were able to get that one guy, and so on. And it's too bad your buddies died, but you did a damn good job. Well, the reality was he wasn't feeling that well, and when he would leave, he'd drive home and he'd just cry. Sometimes when he'd get home, he'd send his wife to the store to get him a pack of cigarettes or a loaf of bread or something, and he'd sit by himself and he'd just cry in the room. Driving to work, he'd just start to cry. For 4 years, when he went to put his weapon on, he would physically shake and sometimes had to take his other hand to put the weapon into his belt. And when he'd go camping with his family, it would not be unusual for him to go off by himself and drink a 6-pack of beer and come back. Well, I don't consider any of those responses, any of those reactions that unusual or that strange or that bizarre for a person involved in a tragic incident or traumatic incident as this officer was. But what I do consider not tragic but sad is I was the first person this guy ever talked to about that incident, and the incident happened 7 years before. One of the most important aspects in dealing with stress or understanding stress is to have an understanding of ourselves and others, whether it be our spouse, our superiors, our subordinates, or even the people we deal with on the street. So what I want to do is talk to you about various ways to understand people. The first way I'd like to talk to you is called a holistic approach to people, or a holistic way of looking at people. Most people, when they spell holistic, spell it with an H. I like to use a W because we're talking about including the whole person, looking at the whole person. And when we do that, we're aware that we're all physical beings. The first thing you notice about me is my physicalness on the film. But in addition to being physical beings, we also have an emotional component to ourselves. We have a social component to ourselves, our relationships with others, and so on. An intellectual component and a spiritual component, whether it be the relationship with a superior being or how you view the cosmos. Now, what I want to submit to you is that each one of these components are interrelated. For example, if we consider somebody who gets a serious injury on duty, what happens to him? Emotionally, he tends to be angry or depressed. His social relationships are changed around. He doesn't go to work. He doesn't see the people he works with. He may not be home and have his relationship with his spouse and family. It can affect the way he thinks and his relationship with a superior being. In addition, one time when I was hurt, I was on crutches, and my wife Barbara claims that I threw the crutches at her, which affected our social relationship. But emotionally, I was angry or upset or depressed, and in addition, it affected how I thought in my relationship. If we consider for a second a person who's depressed, physically they don't feel quite as well. They tend to, their relationships are not too interested in social relationships. It can affect how they think and so on. Also, if we consider somebody who's feeling real good, who's elated, who's up, they feel better physically. They're into meeting people, being with people, and so on. Now, if we look at a social component and think of somebody whose relationship is important to them, the person they live with, the person they're married to, and that there's going to be a separation there. Emotionally, they're affected. They can get depressed, they can be angry. It can affect how they feel physically, and it can affect how they think, and so on. Or you consider somebody who gets a promotion. Emotionally, they tend to feel differently. They may feel elated. Physically, they feel better. They feel better about how they think. You see, when we deal with the physical world, we're very aware of that. We're all the same physically. We have heads, necks, shoulders, upper bodies, middle bodies, lower bodies, ankles, and feet. And we know in the physical world, because we're all the same, that when we have a stimulus, we'll have a similar response. For example, if we stick a needle in my arm will bleed. And if we stuck a needle in each one of your people's arms, your arm would bleed too, because we have the stimulus of sticking a needle and the response of a broken arm. We understand that because we're all the same physically. If we go out to this car over here and slam my arm in the door, my arm will break. And if we took anybody in the audience and put their arm in the door and slammed it, their arm would break too, because we have the stimulus again of the slamming door, the response of a broken arm. And we understand that all very well. Now, when we get to the emotional arena, everything is entirely different. However, we try to look at the emotional arena in the same way. You have this stimulus, you have this response. But you see, it doesn't work that way. You consider, for example, a person, an oversimplification, but a person getting divorced. A person getting divorced. He comes into my office, he's walking slow, he's depressed, he's downhearted, things are going difficult. But then I consider another person who's getting divorced. He comes in skipping and hopping and jumping. He's elated. He can hardly wait until he gets through this divorce. When we have a stimulus in the emotional arena, we can have different responses, because as much as we're the same physically with our heads, necks, upper bodies, middle bodies, ankles, and feet, when it comes to the emotional arena, we're as different as each one of us and each one of you are. We are different heights, we are different weights, we are different skin coloring, hair coloring, eye coloring. We come from different parts of the country. We were raised by different parents. We were raised in different time periods. We are different sexes. So in the emotional arena, when we have a stimulus, we can have a variety of responses. If you think about going to a movie, some people may cry at the movie, some people may laugh, some people may feel good, some people may feel bad. And that happens because we're different. We are not all the same. And too often people are saying, God, I don't understand that person responding like that, because when that happened to me, this is how I responded. Well, emotional responses are different. And they're different because all of us are unique, individuals, special, and different.
In the bush, in the bush, like a snake, like a snake, in the sky, like a hawk, like a hawk, in the sea.
And to show you what I'm talking about is if we give you in a brief way two generations. If we consider on the one hand people who grow up from the early ages of like 4 or 5 up to the early 20s, who grew up in the 1930s and 1940s, and we look at people on the other hand who grew up in the 1960s and the 1970s. First of all, in looking at the people in the 1930s and 1940s, what went on during that time period? Well, there was the Depression. There was World War II. We dealt with teamwork, sticking together. The group was very important. America was important. The country was important. Winning was important. The military was very important. Everybody had to stick together to help the group effort, the country effort. And you can remember, for people who grew up in that generation, if there was a group of people and there was a grenade, whoever jumped on it was a hero, because he risked his life or gave his life for the rest of the group. The group was most important, the team was most important. And what about the family? Well, in the families lived fairly close together. On holidays, they'd all get together because they only lived a few miles away. They were very close together, and they will have certain views of the family. Now, if we look at this other generation in the 60s and 70s, and what happened there? Well, the people were influenced with civil rights. The emphasis was on the individual. The individual is important. The individual is more important than any group, and you cannot mess over one individual for the sake of others. In this generation, if a grenade was thrown, everybody runs. And they also grew up with the Vietnam conflict, which caused the people growing up in this generation to question America, to question the military, to question authority of all types. When kids went to school, their parents would tell them, question your teachers, ask your teachers what they need to know, what you need to know. Learn everything you can, question everything. We had Watergate, which was the overthrow of the president. So what would these people be impressed with? The importance of the individual, the importance of authority, questioning authority. Don't take anything from authority on face value. To go beyond that. And if we even look at the families in the 30s and 40s were fairly close together. Now, a mother lives in Ohio, a sister lives in Denver, another sister lives in New Orleans, and another one's in San Francisco, and grandmother's flying around the world. We are talking about values, not rights or wrongs. There are different values because of the way we grow up. And what's important is that the people from the 30s and 40s try to understand the people coming in today in the 60s and 70s, and also that the 60s and 70s try to understand and learn from some of the things and experiences people have had in the 30s and 40s. What is stress? In talking more about stress, it's important that we discuss stressors. On page 10, we have defined stressors as any event which produces an autonomic nervous system response. We have also, an autonomic nervous system response is an automatic response. What happens to us is we get an increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased muscle tone. If you think about a cat for a minute, when a cat has a stressor, the hair stands up, the tail puffs out, teeth grit down. These things automatically happen to the cat. Now with us as human beings, in addition to the increased heart rate, the increased blood pressure, the increased muscle tone, we also have adrenal glands above our kidneys. And when we have an autonomic nervous system response, we automatically push adrenaline into our system. And when we do that, we push cholesterol into our system. And in addition, we put more sugar into our system, our hormone levels rise, our digestion stops, we put more red blood cells into our system, more sugar in our system, a lot of high voltage chemicals going through our system. And on page 17 of the workbook is listed all the things that happen to our body when we get into a stress response or when we have stressors. Hans Selye calls this a fight or flight response. And if you think about the cat for a minute, if it's a mouse, the cat will probably fight, and if it's a dog, it'll run away. Well, you see, as police officers, you're not allowed to fight, you're not allowed to run away, and you're not allowed to show you're afraid. So what happens is these chemicals, or these high voltage chemicals which go through our system, can build up, and we can get to a stage of exhaustion, or what we call diseases of adaptation, where because of all the chemicals, we start having bodily reactions or bodily problems. On page 11 of the workbook, we have listed various stressors that police experience, and they come into the officer as a funnel, and then it feeds out to how the effects of these stressors are on him.
The review of the first segment begins with the following definition of stress. Stress is demands or pressures placed upon a system. With that definition in mind, these observations were made. 1. Moderate stress levels improve performance in most individuals, while excessive stress causes wear and tear on the mind and body. 2. Stress is holistic. That is, it affects all at one time, every aspect of living, physical, emotional, social, intellectual, and spiritual. 3. The sources of stress can be personal or off the job and or work-related. 4. Physically, we are all similar. Emotionally, we are all different because of our divergent backgrounds. And 5. We have isolated stressors that have an effect on administrators, management, and operations personnel. These stressors can be external, over which we have no control, or they can be internal and controlled by the individual. Now, take the next 60 seconds and complete the Check Yourself exercise on page 15 of the workbook. When you have completed the test, compare your answers with those at the bottom of the page.
This is the American Educational Television Network, serving the continuing education needs of the nation's law enforcement professionals.
In the first segment of this program, stress was defined and its causes and effects examined. In this segment, we're going to examine stress as it pertains to you specifically. You'll be able to evaluate your own stress levels and learn how to handle the excesses. To begin your stress profile, turn to the hurry sickness or pretest that you've already completed on page 6, and we'll evaluate your individual scores. The closer you are to 100 points, the more hurry sickness you have, or the more characteristics of a type A personality you have. Remember that type A personalities are aggressive, hard driving, and inflict a lot of stress upon themselves, a lot of it needlessly. Type A people are discussed at length on page 12 of the workbook. If your personal score on the pretest is over 50, you have cause for concern. In those areas where you scored 4s and 5s, you should concentrate on reversing your attitude or behavior to help alleviate stressful situations. By now, you should have some insight into whether or not stress is a concern in your life. To help you round out your profile, we're going to have you take 2 more tests. The Risco chart on page 14 is designed to give you an estimate of your chances of suffering a heart attack. It should take 4 to 5 minutes to read the instructions on page 13 and complete the chart on the following page. Complete the chart at this time and total your score. The program will resume in 5 minutes with an evaluation of the scores for your information. Your scores for the Risco chart can range from a low of 6 to a high of 62. It is difficult for a male to score between 6 and 11, but if you scored between 12 and 17, your risk is well below average. Of course, the lower your score, the better. A score between 18 and 24 makes you an average risk for a heart attack. 25 to 31 becomes a moderate risk. 32 to 40 is a dangerous level, and over 40 means you should stay right where you are and call a doctor. The next test was developed by the Northwest Mutual Life Insurance Company and Health Maintenance Organization. It is designed to evaluate your general health and your ability to handle stress by calculating your life expectancy. It's called the longevity game, and it's found on page 16 of the workbook. If you will turn to page 16, we can complete the test and calculate the scores together. We begin at age 74, the life expectancy of the normal person, and we'll consider your life in a series of categories numbered 1 through 11. If a particular category does not pertain to you, wait for the next category. As we consider each category, add or subtract the appropriate number of years to your total and fill in the blank. 1. If you exercise regularly or work out every day, add 3 years to your life. If your lifestyle contains little or no physical activity, subtract 3 years. 2. If you have a relaxed approach to life, if you roll with the punches, add 3 years. If you're overly ambitious, nervous, a nail-biter, subtract 3. And if you consider yourself unhappy, subtract another year. 3. If you average 1 moving violation a year, subtract 2 from your total. If your average is less than that, add 2 years. If you have an unblemished driving record, give yourself a bonus year. 4. If you know your own blood pressure, you're probably health conscious and have had a recent checkup. Give yourself another year. If not, subtract 1. 5. If you are 65 and still working, add 3 years. 6. And pay close attention to this one. If you have a grandparent who reached age 85, add 2 years. If all your grandparents reached 80, add 6 years. However, you must subtract 4 years if either parent died of a stroke or heart attack before age 50, and 3 years if a parent or sibling has been diabetic since childhood. 7. Smoking more than 2 packs of cigarettes a day costs you 8 years. More than 1 pack, 6 years. And less than 1 pack a day, 3 years. 8. If you average 2 drinks a day, lose 1 year, and subtract 2 years for every additional daily drink. 9. If you are female, add 3 years. If you are male, subtract 3 years. 10. Give yourself 2 extra years if you don't add salt to your diet and you avoid fatty foods. Subtract 8 years if you're 50 pounds overweight. 4 years if you're 30 to 40 pounds over. And 2 years if you're 10 to 30 pounds over. 11. Because the life expectancy for law enforcement officials is less than 65, no points will be added in this category. The cumulative score you now have is your life expectancy in years. Compare that to the earlier statistic of a police officer's average lifespan of 59 years. By taking the results of this test, the Risco chart, and the hurry sickness test, you can build a fairly accurate profile of yourself. The profile will tell you your risk for heart attack, your life expectancy, and how close you are to being a type A personality. And remember, only 1 type A in 10,000 will live to be 60 years old. They are explosive, impatient, aggressive people, and almost every one of them believes that they are the one who will beat the odds. So be very honest with your self-appraisal. Look at your stress patterns and write yourself a prescription on how you're going to manage the stressful areas of your life. Be candid and thorough. It could save your life. Now let's look at what you can do to help reduce stress levels for yourself. At the bottom of page 24 are 7 basic activities that can help you live longer. Men who perform 6 out of 7 of these activities can add as much as 11 years to their lifespan. Women can add up to 7 years. The list is not as easy to follow as you might think at first glance. 50 to 80% of groups polled said they did not eat breakfast. Professions such as law enforcement are not conducive to 7 hours sleep or the eating of regular meals because of the shift work and the requirements of the jobs themselves. Likewise, police officers and other professionals often smoke or drink as a means to relax and escape the pressures of their daily routines. You might think that the availability of exercise facilities and the very nature of the profession itself would make it easy for police officers to be active and maintain an ideal body weight, but that is often not the case. It is very important to be physically active each and every day. Dr. Stratton elaborates.
One activity that requires discipline is that of exercise. Exercise is probably the best general thing you can do to reduce stress. The best type of exercise is aerobic exercises. Aerobics means with oxygen. It deals with the exchange of oxygen within the cardiovascular system, such things as running, jogging, racquetball, bicycling, all those activities that give you the sustained exchange of oxygen within the cardiovascular system. When we think about the holistic approach and feeling good physically, it helps you feel better emotionally. That is one reason that exercise is good for you. In addition to that, there are 3 things that exercise can do for you. First of all, when you exercise, you produce inside of yourself a chemical called norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is an antidepressant. It's a drug we put into Elavil, Triavil, antidepressant types of medication. And when you exercise, you produce that for yourself. An overstatement of this is if you know somebody who exercises regularly and doesn't do that for a while, he may talk about the fact that he's down, not feeling too well, things aren't going too well for him. When you exercise, you dispel cholesterol. You use up cholesterol so it can't build up on the interior wall of the vein or artery. Well, if you remember, we talked about veins and arteries going into the heart. Well, the pipes to the heart are like the pipe in the faucet. And what can happen is cholesterol, the fatty acids, and triglycerides, other fatty acids, hang on to the interior wall of the vein. And so what happens if the vein's like this, because of the fatty acids, the cholesterol and triglycerides, the hole becomes much smaller. And when you have a stressor, and you have that autonomic nervous system response with your heart demanding more blood, more increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, and if that passage is small, the blood can't get through and you have a heart attack. It would be like running water through that faucet every day for a half hour to an hour. It would keep the pipe much cleaner. The third thing exercise can do for you, and we can't do this in a day, we can't do it in a week, we may have to do it over a long period of time, is that if we do develop a blockage somewhere and if we exercise regularly, we are physically capable of building ancillary vessels to bypass the blockage. What we're saying is you can develop new tissue because our bodies are amazing things. On page 18, we have some things for you to look at in terms of exercise, and there are some cautions. I encourage you to pay attention to those because some of you may have been ex-athletes and think you can do all kinds of things, but when you start out, if you haven't exercised for a while, you need to be careful so that you don't overdo it and cause yourself more difficulty than not exercising at all. A second general way to reduce stress is in terms of diet. And on page 19, we have some concepts about nutrition and diet that are important to you, and we also list the 4 basic food groups. Now, one of the things that I'd like to tell you about diet is try to look at yourself again as a system. What do you put into your system? Do you put things into your system that help it run well, that help it go well, that will make it run great, or do you put things in it that cause it to chug along and not work so well? I get reminded of an officer I worked with once who was very much into motorcycles. And what he did is he'd spend 2 or 3 hours a day on these motorcycles. He had one motorcycle that was all chrome, and he would polish it, and he'd be very careful because he put this into shows and races. And you know, when he went to put gas into that machine, he didn't just go to the gas pump and put gas into it. He mixed the gases, and he mixed the oils because he wanted to have that machine run perfectly. Then I would look at how he dealt with himself. He was a diabetic. He got up in the morning, started drinking Cokes, smoking cigarettes, and eating junk food throughout the day. If we look at his behavior and we say, what's important to this guy? What goes on with him? What is of value to him? What do we find? We find that he puts his effort and his energy into the motorcycle, and he doesn't pay much attention to himself. It appears as if he values the motorcycle more than himself. There are 3 categories that you have no control over. You have no control over your age, you have no control over your heredity, and no control over your sex, whether you're a male or female. There are 5 categories you have control over. The first one we'll talk about is smoking. If the Surgeon General can't convince you that smoking's not good for your health, there's no way I will be able to. But if you look at the risk-o chart and you stop smoking, you could lower your risk for heart attack 2 whole categories. You can move from a dangerous level to an average risk for heart attack. The other 4 categories you have control over are blood pressure, cholesterol, your weight, and the amount of activity you get involved in. And if we think about those 4 activities, you can reduce blood pressure by exercise, you can reduce blood pressure by diet, you can reduce cholesterol by exercise, you can reduce cholesterol by diet, you can reduce your weight by exercise, you can reduce your weight by diet. And activity is exercise. So by those 2 activities, you can lower your risk for heart attack 1 or 2 more categories. So the importance of exercise and diet is extremely high. And if we look at the longevity chart once again, the difference between exercise and no exercise takes 6 years off your life. If you're overweight from 10 to 30 pounds, it takes 2 years off your life. If you smoke 2 packs a day, it takes another 8 years off your life. And the next category we'll talk about is relaxation. In the longevity chart, relaxation and a relaxed approach to life versus a uptight approach to life is a difference of 6 years. On page 20 is the 3rd general way, and that's relaxation. On page 20, we have Herbert Benson's relaxation response. What he talks about is finding a relaxed way to be with yourself in a quiet environment. It really doesn't matter whether you use the relaxation response, self-hypnosis, meditation, or whatever, but that you find a way to be at peace and at ease with yourself. Now, if you look at that on page 20, you'll see that the requirements are quite easy. But we talked about discipline before, and we're talking about doing this for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night. And what happened is Herbert Benson found that when he did this with business executives for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night, it lowered their blood pressure 10 points. One time I was discussing this with a group of police chiefs, and one of them raised his hand and said, you know, all that stuff's real good, but what about if you don't have the opportunity to spend 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night doing that? And I want to tell you exactly what I told the chief. And what I said is, Chief, I feel sorry for you. If you don't have an hour a day to devote to yourself to make sure that you are feeling good, that things are going well for you, to keep yourself in good running order, physically, emotionally, and so on, something's wrong. When we die, we're gone, and people deal with the living. They pay attention to those that are around. Sure, your relatives may care, they may get involved and concerned about you, but when you're gone, that's it. You have some control over how long you live. There are things you can do to live longer. But like I said before, you may choose not to because it's a rough world out there, but I think that's the wrong choice. One last thing on page 21, we have the issue of looking at your pace in how you lead your life. One thing you have to keep in mind is some of us are turtles and some of us are racehorses, and we have to know which way we work. But you can look at your pace and go through the statements there on page 21 and see which things you're doing now or which things you think you should do that would make your life go a little better. In discussing basic general ways to reduce stress, first and most importantly, and something we've emphasized throughout this program, is knowing yourself. The more you understand yourself, your values, your attitudes, the easier it is to understand your stressors. And when you do have these stressors, you may be able to avoid them altogether or reduce them when they occur. This self-knowledge can occur in several ways. One way is through counseling, whether it be with a counselor or a psychologist, because with an honest and open discussion with another person who will be honest with you, you can examine yourself and see how you like your life stances. When I do therapy with people, I like to say that what I want to do is take a mirror and hold it up in front of them and have them look at how they see themselves. Do they like the way they see themselves physically? And we'll take a mirror and look at them emotionally and socially and so on. Another way is through finding quiet times where you can have self-talks to examine your goals, your wants, your needs. You can also find these quiet times by yourself or with your spouse. Another way to understand yourself is through conversations with close friends. Another important thing in the whole general category of reducing stress is your attitude. It's important to have a positive attitude. Your attitude affects very much the way you are in the world and how you behave. Having a positive attitude about yourself, your abilities, your skills is very important, and a positive attitude about how you handle and face stress is also important. Maintaining a positive attitude can be difficult for police at times, especially when we consider the negative and tragic events that occur in their work world. When we are checking stressors, it's important to look at the stressors we have control over. If you examine the various stressors listed throughout the workbook, there are many line officers and even supervisory personnel that have these stressors and yet do not have any control over them. When they let these stressors they have no control over affect them, they still have the same autonomic nervous system responses, which cause those high voltage chemicals brought on by the autonomic nervous system to come up and be expended. When they are expended in this way without any fruitful use, it's like spending $10 of adrenaline on a 10-cent problem, or it's similar to what I've seen some administrators do in the past. They spend a lot of time pole vaulting over mouse boards. What they're doing is spending much energy without any payoff. When we let stressors that we have no control over affect us, we're doing the same thing. In these two segments on stress, we've emphasized what stress is, its effects on you, and ways that you can manage or reduce stress. It's important to remember that more police officers die of stress each year than all officers killed in the line of duty. We have tried to place special emphasis on the importance and value of each police officer and his or her ability to live a longer, happier, healthier, and more productive life without stress.